Housing across the board is expensive. It's expensive to rent a home right now, and it's expensive to buy a property right now. We're going to go over an article that talks about more people becoming homeless throughout the United States who are working, who are people who have jobs, who want to rent an apartment but simply can't afford to. And we're going to talk about how we got into this situation. Why are homes so expensive? Why is rent so expensive? And in my opinion, it comes down to the federal government. See, over the past 15 years or so, the federal government and the Federal Reserve stimulated the housing market. They kept interest rates artificially low. And after COVID, they supercharged that stimulus by giving people money directly into their bank accounts, by lowering interest rates further, by buying mortgage backed securities. And that caused the housing market to shoot up. That caused rent to shoot up. All that money found its way back into housing. Now they turn that money supply off. They stopped giving people free money. People have to make their student loan payments. Interest rates are closer to a market rate compared to where they were in the past, but prices haven't come down. And we're going to talk about why that is. Why haven't prices come down? Well, part of the reason why prices haven't come down is it's more expensive to build now, right? If things were done, in a perfect world, all the building for new housing that's needed now, both multifamily and single family properties, would have been built back before the pandemic or peaked during the pandemic. So there were enough homes for people who wanted to buy them, enough homes for people who wanted to rent them. But back before the pandemic, when things were smooth, the market was relatively balanced. Builders were building at a pace that kept up with the demand at that time. But after all the stimulus that the government added, more people jumped into the housing market, started to purchase properties. And then when the stimulus was turned off, people decided not to sell their homes because they didn't want to give up their stimulated interest rates at a lower price, their affordable mortgage payments. And many people who want to buy a home couldn't afford to do so at these higher prices with these higher interest rates. So because of that, less people bought properties, more people rented properties. That's what kept rents high. That's what's keeping rents high. People can't afford to buy homes, so they're forced to rent. We see that the vacancy rate for rents is still relatively low. And so landlords don't have a large incentive to drop rents. And typically when rents go up, historically speaking, they don't go down. This is where rents stay. So unless we're going to see a dramatic shift into how the rental market operates, this is likely the new reality for America. Let's talk about how we got there. Before we do, my name is Liam O'Reilly. I'm a realtor with Jerry Riley Real Estate. If you have any real estate needs, all of my contact information is in the description. Reach out to me directly. I would be happy to help you. So this article here out of the Washington Post, more of America's homeless are clocking into jobs each day, which is just very sad. Unlike the unlikely face of homelessness, working Americans with decent paying jobs who simply can't afford a place to live. Homelessness is up 12% year over year. We see this huge spike, and a lot of that increase, or at least a portion of that increase, is coming from people who aren't addicted to drugs, aren't people with mental health issues. These are people who are working full time, who simply don't make enough money to afford rent now across the country. So as we scroll down here into this article, we see a record 12.1 million Americans, or about 1 in 4 renters, are spending at least half of their income on rent and utilities, which is just insane. We see the average rent is at $2,000 per month. The average mortgage payment, including taxes and insurance, is at $2,500 per month, right? Housing is just not very affordable for most people right now. So how did we get here? Basically what happened, we take a look at the M2 money supply. M2 money supply has been increasing steadily for the past, really for the past 60 years or so, but it really shot up after the pandemic. That is the supercharged stimulus that I was talking about. Those were the stimulus checks that went out to everyday Americans. Now, at the same time, the Federal Reserve started increasing the size of their balance sheet. The Federal Reserve bought more mortgage-backed securities, stimulated housing, encouraged lending, which dropped interest rates artificially low and made it easier for people to jump into the housing market. So they did. The government sent you money. That made it into the hands of people who could afford to buy properties. The government and the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates, which made it easier for people to purchase properties. That sent home values skyrocketing as more people jumped into the housing market. And now that stimulus for those homeowners is still in effect, right? The mortgages that you get here in the United States are 30 years, are 15 years for the most part. And so the people who took advantage of that stimulus are still benefiting from it today. They're still able to pay their low mortgage rate, which is much lower than things with them where they are today, right? If we take a look at, if we just do a quick search here for a mortgage calculator, you can see right now, including taxes and fees, if you look at where the median sales price was, we'll say back in 2022, which was below 350,000 for the first part of 2022. We're just going to use that 350,000 number for everything bought earlier than 2 years ago. So we take a look at 350,000 and type in where mortgage rates were at that time, which was around 3%. We see so your total monthly payment, including taxes, fees, including insurance, is $1,600 per month. Right now, that mortgage payment is, when we scroll back to Redfin here, is at around $2,500 per month. So it was about $900 per month cheaper to buy the median price home, the exact same property. We're not talking about a nicer home. We're talking about the median price home, the same exact home in America. It was $900 per month cheaper for you to buy that same home in 2022, at the beginning of 2022, than it is today. And that's why housing is so expensive. People who bought their properties back when the government stimulated the housing market are not going to give up that low interest rate. They're going to do everything they can to keep that $1,600 a month mortgage rate, because their other option is to rent for $2,000 per month, or to sell and buy the exact same home, right? If they're going to sell their home and purchase something that is the median price property, their new mortgage payment is going to be around $2,500 per month. So they're going to do everything they can to keep that $1,600 per month payment, which is why properties aren't hitting the market. That's why home values haven't gone down, and it's why home prices are so expensive. Now, the fact that home prices are so expensive is what's keeping the vacancy rate as low as it is. When we take a look here, residential vacancies and home ownership in the second quarter of 2024, we see that home ownership vacancies sit at 0.9%. So those are people who own homes and can't sell them. That's only 0.9% of all the homes out there in the United States, all the vacant homes. Now, if you're living in your property and you're trying to sell it, that home seller does not factor into this vacancy rate. These are homes that are vacant on the market and are not being purchased. Now, when we take a look at the rental vacancy rate, it's at 6.6%, which is, a relatively healthy number throughout the economy until you compare it to past vacancy rates. We see here, leading up to the 2008 crisis, the vacancy rate was at around 10%. Right before the dot-com bust, it was at around 8%. After the great financial crisis, the vacancy rate was at 11%. Right now, we're at 6.6%. This is because people who can't afford to purchase homes are renting now, and that's driving up the cost of rent, keeping vacancy rates low, which means that there's not much incentive for landlords to lower their rent. And typically speaking, historically speaking, rents haven't dropped. They don't really drop year over year, at least not significantly. They don't crash like home prices do. Rents tend to stay flat or tick upwards. So the fact that rent is now at $2,000 across the United States, according to this article, is likely where it's going to remain for years to come, right? It might go down slightly, but it's not going to go down to this $1,500 per month number that we saw in 2020. Now, when we take a look at housing starts, right? Housing starts. So back before the pandemic, there was a reasonable amount of building going on. Now, much less building than we historically saw, but builders were keeping up with demand, right? They weren't overbuilding, so there was a glut of supply that they had to hold on to. They were building homes. There was enough existing sellers out there to keep the housing market moving. And so they didn't build at a high rate, but they kept up with the market. They didn't underbuild based on the amount of demand that was out there in the housing market. Now, in a perfect world, if things had worked out great, and in order to have enough housing supply that's affordable for where we are today, they would have overbuilt during this time. And then when the government stimulus happened back in 2020, we take a look at that M2 money supply, when all that new money got rushed into the system, when the Federal Reserve stimulated the housing market and bought mortgage-backed securities, that excess supply that they could have built here would have been eaten up. But there was no way for home builders to predict that, to prepare for that extreme stimulus that we saw in 2020. So as a result, the supply got eaten up. It got eaten up by people who wanted to purchase properties, who had this new money, who took advantage of the low mortgage rates. And so now we're seeing building trending downwards. Now, this is the single family home housing starts. We take a look at multifamily properties. It's an even steeper decline recently. And part of that reason is, one, that stimulus is turned off. So when you bring more inventory to the market, there's less confidence that people are going to be able to purchase that property. The builders have less confidence that there's an end buyer for their completed product. And it's the same thing on the rental side. There's less confidence that renters will be able to pay the high rents that make new building possible today, because the cost of everything has gone up. If you've looked in the news, if you've, or just lived in America recently, you know that prices of everything are up. Basically, across the board, everything is more expensive than it was before the pandemic. And this includes building, right? It's more expensive for labor, to pay people to build the home. The materials are more expensive than they were back in 2019. Taxes are more expensive. The permitting fees are more expensive. So to bring more housing to the market, it costs more than it did back then. So you need to generate a higher return, both on the sales side and on the rental side. And so in order to bring more inventory to the market, it's going to be inventory that's at a higher rate, that's either higher priced homes for sale or higher priced rentals, to make things profitable for the developers adding this inventory to the market. That's why we're not seeing a ton of inventory come online right now, despite a housing shortage, despite an affordable housing shortage. It's just not affordable to build homes with current prices, especially with interest rates where they are. So let me know what you think about this. This is why I think both rental prices and home prices are so high. I think I'm going to do a deeper video about this, a longer video that breaks down exactly how we got here. I think it really all started back in 2008 during that financial crisis, when the Federal Reserve started stimulating the housing market and lending standards tightened. And that's all playing into why home sale prices are so high today. Let me know if you guys want to see that video. Again, thank you for watching. Leave me a comment. I'll see you in the next video.